Hey fam. So, I know what you might be thinking. Riley, you look so great today. And oh my god, thank you. I really just I tried on this new suit and I just really thought that like I went helped out with a student organization over at the law school, and I was walking back and I was like, I don't want to get changed out just yet. I figured this would be a good time to make a video. Um and also clearly I did a lot of work around here, right? I was just looking at, so like, yeah, addressing that. I looked at a lot of my older videos, and I do like this conversational sort of structure, but I was trying to think of ways to sort of increase the quality of the content without taking away from that. And so what I decided to do was just to make the presentation, well, I thought a little bit nicer. Um, got some pride colors, got some stuff for me up here, got some logos and organizations all around that I feel very strongly about, but you do you. Uh, but hey, we're in this. I'm not sure if you call it work, but this realm where representation is very important. And so, hey, if I could help represent other groups that are also doing great work for other people, then awesome. I assume that more logos will be added on over time. These are just ones that are reflective of what is currently on here, aside from like some schools and whatnot that I went to, which I'm not sure if I wanted to put up there. I'll think about it. But anyway, to the topic of discussion today. So this is sadly still relevant, right? Especially recently with the defeat of the Equality Act. Of course, what I'm talking about are trans bathroom rights. I'll move this over here a little bit closer. Hopefully you can hear a little bit better. But no, anyway, so there's still a national topic of discussion about, oh, we shouldn't let trans people in the bathroom that they identify with. And to recap, for some of you who somehow aren't in the loop, how'd you get to my channel? But to recap, essentially, the arguments that usually go for anti-trans rights goes along the lines of, well, trans women are actually men, they're predatory men, and they're predatory men that only want to be acknowledged as women so that they can get into, that might still be a third point, so that they can get into women's bathrooms and usually molest little girls, right? Those are sort of the premises that current transphobia, especially in this specific area, relies on. And there are lots of people who have picked it apart, right? The most obvious argument is that, like, all right, listen, if someone is wanting to molest little girls, then they're going to not give two shits about whether or not they can legally get into a bathroom. Like, if they're going to commit such a serious crime, then they're not going to worry about other legal obstacles in the way of commissioning that crime. Like, it's just stupid. And if you take 2 seconds to think about that, literally any reasonable person would see that. Or rather, any reasonable person who knows a trans person. It's unfortunate that right now, in larger society, there's not exactly a lot of great representation, and that's beginning to change. As there are, I know that there are some like actresses and actors out there who are trans who do a lot of good work with advocacy and activism, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there doing that work and making more representation happening, and that's awesome, right? And generally speaking, civil rights are moving in such a way that they're getting better for trans people. You can see a much more upward trend. Although I say that, and some of you might be thinking, well, wait a second, Riley, aren't like transphobes louder now than ever before? And you're not wrong, right? But a lot of people have sort of made the claim, like Jamie Dodger the other day made a video basically about how this is unfolding in the UK, where many transphobes over there, especially like the LGB Alliance, is I think what they're called, have gotten much more vocal recently because they're angry that trans people are getting as much progress as we have. So, yes, there's a lot more opposition, but it's because people are angry that we're doing as well as we are. So, that's a degree of optimism. But alas, right now, especially at national politics here in the United States, it's still something that is hotly debated with politics or with politicians in, say, like Congress, right, over in Washington. And it's because, unfortunately, we really don't hear that much from actual trans people or LGBT people in general, right? Look at what happened with the Equality Act, right? That was an act that was gonna guarantee a lot of what would seem to be very basic protections, and it would have gotten rid of this bathroom issue, right? It would have been like, you can use the bathroom that you identify with without worry of, prejudice against. Well, I mean, like, you would be offered protection under law, right? That's one of the things. There's a lot. Go read it yourself. It would have been a great amendment, but it didn't get passed because we have a Republican majority right now. I think in the House, right? I know in the Senate that we do. I can't remember if when it was being debated, if there was a Republican majority in the House or not. But we have a Republican president and a Republican Senate, and that was enough to say no. So, yeah, that kinda sucks. Yeah, and lots of people have made commentary about how it sucks already. Lots of people have delved into deeper issues about explaining why that happened the way it did and what we can do to move forward. And that's all good discussion, but this is mostly a channel about me and my experiences, right? And while I do like talking about those subjects, because I mean, like, I probably know more than at least the average person. I'm in law school. This is what I'm studying. We even talked about the Equality Act and like this whole thing the other day in constitutional law, right? But and maybe I'll talk about it more someday when, I'm a lawyer and I have passed the bar and all that. But today what I want to do is talk about just how this discourse has affected my life, and sort of make my own case for, how my life has been kind of harder without it, right? Maybe it's hard to say what the audience is. Maybe it's trans people who can relate and know that you can get through. Maybe it's lawmakers in DC, although I doubt that any Republican would watch me with all of this around, because unfortunately Republicans are like not great about human rights, but hey, what will you do? But if you are watching, then maybe you'll consider my history. So really when this starts is around 6 months into my medical transition, right? Again, I don't know how you wouldn't know what the terminology is, but for those of you who somehow are not aware, medical transition is, I mean, there's no like one clear way of doing it, but for everyone who goes through it, you go through a series of either HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, you either, some combination of that, whereby you take a medication so that the hormonal levels in your blood will match the gender that you identify with, and your body will effectively go through another puberty to cause your body to change in such a way to better represent that, or like some combination of that, or surgery, depending on what people want, right? There's no one clear way of doing it. You do it to the degree that it makes you comfortable with yourself and your presentation, right? For example, I got facial feminization surgery to better help people recognize that I am a woman without me having to like sit down with them and explain it to them. I might be getting bottom surgery. That's another discussion, and that's very personal, so we won't get into that. But those are examples, right? And so I was 6 months on HRT when this pertinent discussion sort of begins, right? When you are on HRT, at least as a trans woman, I don't know how it works for trans men because I'm not one, but for trans women, when you are on hormone replacement therapy, it's a slow process. I mean, granted, there are some trans girls who just like pass immediately, and I look at them and I'm like, how? But anyway, for the most part, average person, from what I can tell, usually you will start seeing noticeable results, or rather, like, as I'm going through it, like, usually, like, trans people will document, like, every single little change, and, like, man, it, like, when you want to get through as quickly as possible because you're like, oh yeah, I'm on the path, I'm gonna get there. um, and so like obviously I documented every single little change my body went through during the first couple months. Eventually I realized it was a really slow process, and I just kind of sat back and did my own stuff and let that take its course, right? But right around that 6 month mark, that's where changes start manifesting, like enough small changes have manifested over time to rise to the level where now they're starting to become noticeable by other people, right? Things like breast growth, things like facial softening, things like growing out my hair, things like my decrease in muscle, things like my body overall shaping up very differently, right? These are all things which collectively together started making interactions in public awkward. There's usually a point in most people's transition where, like, usually you can I mean, there's probably a lot more nuance, but I'm gonna break it down to like 3 stages, right? There's pre-transition, right, where you're just presenting as probably your assigned gender at birth. There's the end, where you're presenting as, you know, the gender that you identify with, the gender that you are, right? And then there's this middle stage where your presentation and my presentation was very ambiguous. I had a lot of characteristics stereotypical of sort of both binary genders, and it made a lot of social interactions very awkward. And the main one was using the bathroom, because, and again, it's hard to put you, if you're like a cis binary viewer of mine, it's hard to explain to you the mindset, but I want to try and do my best to try and put you in my situation, right? Imagine that you're someone that's already very conscious about how they look, all right? Which a lot of people in America are, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are body conscious, but imagine if now that specifically manifests and you constantly wondering how other people see you according to your gender, how other people identify you, right? Granted, I know that there are some people out there who just don't care, right? And to you, awesome, live your best life. But for a lot of us, and myself included, right, it made life very hard on me because I had no idea how I would be treated if I went out shopping, if I went out driving. I drove for Lyft for a while. I had no idea how it was going to go over if I picked someone up and I tried to talk to them, right? And even something like how they rate me. Because like, if they just decided that they didn't like me because, like, oh, they couldn't tell what gender I was not there, and I was too confusing to them, they could just give me a poor rating and just like tank. You know, that affects how much money I make. That affects how many rides I get later on. And some of you might have heard that last comment that like some people might have just been like confused and frustrated by my presentation, and you might look at me and think, Riley, no reasonable person would be like confused and angry. Oh, listen here, right? It happens everywhere, but an important part of the story is that for a large part of my transition and well past this 6 month mark, I was living in the South alone. Or rather, I mean, I was usually living with at least one person, right? But I was always living in the South. And so that made going everywhere difficult for me, right? It meant that if I went shopping, I had to worry about people harassing me there. It meant that when I was working, I had to worry about random people harassing me then. And especially, oh my God, using the restroom. Like, I basically had to plan my entire day. I had to plan my entire day around when I thought I was going to use the restroom, right? And that sucked because I drove for a living, or at least for a good part of it, right? Which meant that at any given point, I might be like a half hour to an hour away from my home. And so while I usually tried to go there before I left, that couldn't always be available to me. And so I'd have to stop over at like a gas station or a Walmart or what have you. I'm not sure if you know this, but let me just tell you, if you live in the South and you go to somewhere like a gas station or a Walmart, you don't meet the most savory people there. Generally speaking, you meet people who, if they want to harass you, they're not going to exactly have like a second thought of, oh, actually maybe this person is like having a tough time, maybe I shouldn't bother them. No, they just go up to you and they just let you have it. And this was what I was always afraid of. It happened to me. It never happened to me in the bathroom, but it happened to me several times where, I'd be walking through a city, or I'd be walking to like my gas station, and someone would wave at me and be like, "Hi," and I would say wave back, and I would say hi back to them, and they would yell some. You would see their expression sort of change, and and they would yell some not great explicitives at me, and we will not say what they are. And I mean, that's something I've experienced. I mean, like, that's something I think I mentioned in another video, that's something that still will happen sometimes in Baltimore. Because even now, sometimes I still don't pass. I mean, like, from what I can tell, and this is just like my best gauge of it, I know that my voice doesn't always pass, right? It does a decent amount of the time. Most of the time when I'm in public and I'm interacting with people, they'll gender me correctly, and awesome. It helps when I apparently look passable enough, and some people say I'm attractive, but whatever. I don't have enough self-confidence to admit that. but there's a lot of times where I'll start talking, and people will change how they're addressing me. And sometimes it doesn't matter because, people like don't care, or sometimes people, like, if they do care, they have enough. Like, usually I'll be in a space where it's like socially unacceptable to be like a bigot, fortunately, and that's a consequence of being over on the East Coast and in Baltimore now. But like down in the South, there wasn't really any sort of protection for that, right? And especially when I was living on my own and I was largely self-employed. And so everywhere I went, I was terribly, terribly afraid of using the restroom, because like the worst fear is going into a restroom and mind you, all that I'm trying to do is take a piss or whatever, right? Just using the restroom is literally the only thing I'm trying to do. I remember there was this one time where I went into a Walmart, and I was I really had to go, and so I went back to where the restrooms were. And I looked at, there was the guys and the girls, and I was about to go into the women's stall, except then I saw right before me going in, there was like a mother and a child. And I literally looked at that and I was like, there is no way I'm going to risk putting myself in there with those people, because like the worst fear, right, is that you are seen in like a public space with a child and someone automatically assumes A, that you are a sexual predator, even though that's fucking ridiculous, and B, starts harassing you while you're literally, and I repeat, just trying to take a piss. So I waited outside of that restroom for like another like 10-15 minutes until this woman and her child finally left out, and I went in, and yeah. But it's just like there are so many of those experiences that I have dealt with over the past couple of years, and I still deal with. Like even at my law school, it is clearly a very welcoming and accepting space over there, right? They've had lots of trans students. They even have like gender neutral bathrooms. And actually, it's interesting because the gender neutral bathrooms were actually put in by non-binary students who went to the law school before I did. Specifically, they're advocated by one who's an alumni now and who I had lunch with the other day, and they are awesome. But yeah, so I appreciate that that's there, and I appreciate that the institution will still back me, and I know that logically there's all of the people there are generally, if not supportive, at least won't voice any disagreement if I choose to use like a women's restroom. But I will specifically go out of my way to use the gender neutral restrooms, and usually the single serve ones, right? Like the single person ones. Because God, I'm still terrified. Like it's just an effect that's had on me, and I probably need to talk about that with my therapist and unpack it. but like I'm scared to be in bathrooms with women, even though like nowadays I am treated and regarded as one in 99.9% of my life. And so I made this video with the goal of trying to just talk about the human aspect, how this has affected me and why I would want to see change, right? It's about more than just being able to protect myself under law, right? It's a bit more than that, although that is very important, right? It's also just about this fact that, you know, the fact that the government is not willing to support this is, it's sort of like a government sanctioned idea. It's sort of like the government sanctioning the idea that it does not see me as a woman, right? That it won't go to bat for me, and that therefore other people shouldn't think that way either, right? It's the same sort of thing as it's the same sort of problem as the Supreme Court upholding Trump's ban on trans people in the military, right? Of course, yeah, like it has practical implications. In fact, it sort of impacted me because there was a point in my life where I thought about becoming a JAG lawyer, right? But it's a bit more than that as well, because it's the Supreme Court of the United States upholding this idea that you are able to treat trans people in a lesser way than the average citizen just because of who they are. It's saying that discrimination against these people is fine. And obviously there are a lot of problems with that. Not only does it make other people more likely to adopt that sort of view, but it makes me worried, it makes me constantly afraid that anyone in society might have those views, right? And so I have to constantly be on guard for them, and I have to constantly be worried about it, and it's a burden on me. And yeah. So now, do I think that this will change in the future? It may. It really does depend on how this next election goes over. Please vote for this person. This person right here. He's a good guy. Or like Warren or Yang, but like I don't know. Don't split the primaries too much to where Biden just gets it by default, right? That's the main thing I worry about. I thought about putting a Yang sticker on my thing because like I appreciated how he did in the last debate. But yeah, I also just worry about splitting the primary too much to where Biden just sort of gets it because he gets all like the moderate, right-leaning conservatives who didn't want to vote for Trump again. Yeah, that's my worry. But yeah, it really does depend on whether this next election goes over well, and especially considering that one of the Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's one of like the best supporters of civil rights on the Supreme Court and who's just generally awesome, is getting pretty old, and it's hard. Like a lot of people aren't sure whether or not she'll be able to do another 4 years of a Trump term, and then Trump could appoint another Supreme Court justice, and that would be 3. And I don't have anything in front of me, but I feel like that's a pretty big fucking deal. I want to say that's like a record, but again, I don't know for sure. But if he did that, then it's very unlikely that we would see. And I mean, that wouldn't stop an Equality Act from going through, but like it would stop a lot of other judicial decisions, like the Title IX cases before the Supreme Court right now. People are already worried that they're gonna rule saying that the act doesn't cover gender identity and sexual orientation, and that'll only make that worse. So yeah, there's a lot of risk in the future, but the point is, like, for people who are listening, and if you've kept listening, thank you. But please understand, like, I don't know what to say other than I'm not a rapist and I'm just literally trying to live my fucking life. I'm just trying to contribute to society. I'm just trying to be a good person. I'm trying to fight for other people who are in similar situations and who are treated similarly by the government. But like, all of the fears that justify people's beliefs in this area that oppose trans rights are entirely unfounded and just like factually incorrect and offensive, because they propagate very harmful stereotypes in society, stereotypes which people may adopt and are likely to adopt if the government doesn't say anything about it and people don't really know any trans people themselves. So yeah. I'm sorry if I ended on a rather somber note. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Comment below. Reach out to me if you have anything to say about it, or you want to talk about it, or whatever. And yeah, I hope you liked the new setting. Let me know what you think of my recent videos. I also did 2 other videos this weekend, very different from what I normally do. And yeah, that'll probably have a pretty decent impact on how I take my channel going forward. So, alright. Peace out, fam. See ya.